What's going on, bro?
Well, nothing much, but a whole lot at the same time.
Yeah, new baby. That's always awesome.
Oh yeah, no, it's really exciting. It's a probably one of the biggest transitions in my life. But I it was it came with a lot of unexpecteds, but not nothing I couldn't handle.
You know, I always told my kids. So let me back up. When I had my first child, my dad had since passed. And so I was up at the hospital kind of alone, right? Just like going through it with Amber,
Yeah,
so to speak. And some things happened, some complications, and Tyler ended up having to be shipped over to Boise because he had some problems. And I remember thinking, man, I wish my dad was here. So I always told my kids, your first kid, I'm going to be there, right? I'll be out in the waiting room if you need me, especially my sons, right? Amber's always been there with my daughters when they had a baby. But one of my favorite memories of my kids having their children is the first grandchild I ever had. And my son, he walks out as we're walking into the waiting room. We kinda text him and say, "Hey, we're here, we're in the waiting room." So
yep.
hard labor hadn't started yet. And man, my son comes out and he's looking like he's got swagger, right? Like he's got it all under control. And I'm like, "How you doing?" He's like, "Oh, I got this. We've been to all the classes." Uh, I laughed because I laughed then. He's like, "I've been to all the classes. We've read all the books. We're good." And I'm like, "Are you? Are you, champ? All right, go get him, Tiger." And so he goes back. About 6 hours later, he comes out, and I remember we were sitting on this sofa that's just against the wall, and he comes out, says the baby's here, she's healthy. Amber goes back to see the baby, and my son just kind of lets his head fall against the wall. And I'm like, "You okay, kiddo?" And he just looked at me, he's like, "Dad, it just occurred to me." I'm like, "What?" He's like, "I don't know what the hell I'm doing." And I was like, "Well, son, it's it's okay. None of us knew what we were doing." He's like, "You didn't?" I was like, "No, you were like the guinea pig, bro. You got you got all the experiments." But it's kind of true, right? I mean, we have family around us, right? When
Yeah,
most folks have some family around them when a baby's born, and that helps. But there's still no manual to this thing, right? And those kids, they come a little pre-wired. Um, Certainly what you do as parents is going to have a big influence, but like their personalities are intact for the most part when they get here. And so each kid's a little bit different 'cause they're just different people. That's all they are, small people. And, it's always fun to watch them grow. So I was excited for you when I heard you guys were having a baby, and now that the baby's here, I'm just tickled for you. So,
well, yeah, no, thank you very much. It's been a great experience, and I'm looking forward to every little bit of it.
heck yeah, dude. Enjoy every phase of that because it goes quick. As a guy who had 6, took a 20-year break, and now just had a baby, it goes so fast. So fast. Like, with Asher, I'm like, "Yeah, we're slowing it all down," right? My
Yep.
when I was having my kids the first time around, it was, my younger years, I was chasing a buck, right? Not this time around. This time around, things are gonna go a little slower. I'm gonna enjoy being a dad a little more, but
Yep.
well, dude, before we jump into this revelation, which is Joseph Smith 33, and I'll tell
Yeah.
everybody, this deals with some Book of Mormon geography, which is one of my favorite subjects. Um, Mainly because the stakes are low, right? Like if whether it happened in South America or North America shouldn't impact our testimony of the gospel one way or another. This
Really, it
is
shouldn't.
yeah, this is one of those things that I think is up for debate, and I think the debate is fun. um, I've always said I wanted to get a Heartlander and a Mesoamerican guy or a South American guy in the same room for a debate, but I don't want the fist fight either. So, like but no, these ones are fun. The stakes are low. You shouldn't be losing your testimony one way or another. This is just something fun we get to debate. But before we go there, Freeman, let's talk about you a little bit. This is your first time on the
Sure.
show. And,
Yeah.
some folks know you from when you served your mission. Others most are probably a little unfamiliar with you. So let's just get into it, Freeman. What, like, were you raised in the LDS Church? Were you raised in fundamentalism? Like, what's your background?
So when I was born into the church, the LDS Church, the mother church is what I grew up in. And for the most part, my parents were pretty faithful members. That I think that started changing as I got older, as they got older, and as some of the what they felt some betrayal over time. Um,
Can I
but either
ask over
way,
what? Can I ask
so
over what?
yeah, no, that's a good question. That's a good question. I think a big part was probably when Rough Stone Rolling came out, and also the Mormon
Mm,
Stories podcast. Those two in combination, those really shook a lot of the testimony that my parents had, and really just you know pushed them here and there. Now, uh, both my parents are they are technically inactive. However, nevertheless, my dad still has a very he throughout it all he still says that Joseph Smith's a prophet. And my mother, although she doesn't necessarily believe in the LDS Church, she does believe in a higher power, and they're both in good places, and they're both very good people. But
sure.
this shook him really early on, and it at first it didn't shake me at all. That wasn't a big deal for me because religion, it wasn't it wasn't something that was I was so concerned with. When this is all happening, I was maybe between the ages of 7 and 18 ultimately. And we were moving around because my dad was a salesman for a technology company that his father started, my grandfather, and we would travel to different places. First place we went to it was Italy. We stayed and lived there for 3 years. I was only 7, but we left almost when I was 10, I believe. And but that wasn't the first trip. We went to Scotland, shortly after coming back to the States. We would, stay in Scotland for about a year and a half, and all throughout this time, we still are going to church, but the real shake to their testimony started to happen around this time, around Scotland, and especially around the next place we went to, which was Australia. And ultimately, both my parents stopped going to church. They stopped going completely. I remember I would walk to church when we were back in
Mhm.
St. George in southern Utah, where I was raised. Um, I would still walk to church. Church isn't that far; it was a block away. But eventually, and it was over something stupid too, something really dumb. Uh, one of the kids during young men's, it was a young men's activity. One of the kids stole my ice cream sandwich, and I just did not want to hang around them anymore, so I stopped going to church. And really, that didn't necessarily mean I stopped believing in these things. Really, it just
Right.
meant I didn't want to be around those people. But what really
Well,
shook
dude,
it was
someone comes for your ice cream sandwich. That's serious business.
no,
I
it
mean, at
is. It
that
really
age,
is.
yeah.
That's life and death kind of scenario there. And no, but
Mhm.
the
I believe that's
ultimately
one of those. That's one of those that'll get you put in outer darkness. You take Freeman's ice cream sandwich. I mean, that
no,
goes
no, it
without
is.
saying.
It is. Yeah, I know many people who have veered the wayward path just over an ice cream sandwich. And it's not a good path to take.
Not
But
not a pretty
uh
picture.
but really the big loss was when I figured that I couldn't get any answers from prayer and I didn't know who God was. And I couldn't communicate with him. I didn't know how to communicate with him. I didn't know how to receive answers, and there was really no one there to tell me how or what or why. And I mean, I'm sure there would be people if I asked and I looked and I saw, but I didn't seek it out because my nearest neighbors to that would be my parents, and uh, more often than not, they didn't talk much about religion at that stage. And eventually, when I turned 18, I decided, well, by this point, I had already become a communist. So I was a Marxist, Leninist, Maoist, which, if you know Marx, if you know Lenin, if you know Mao Zedong, I literally, I had the high school library order Mao Zedong's Little Red Book so I could
Okay, so
read it.
let me ask you this. What was the appeal? How old would you have been at this time?
So 17, 18. This is late high school, just after graduation.
What appealed to you about that?
So as I lost faith in religion, as I lost faith in God, really, because it had nothing to do with the LDS Church. I had I wasn't bothered at all from anything that was said about Joseph Smith in particular, anything that some parents might have brought up here and there about, oh, Joseph Smith had a seer stone. Well, okay, that doesn't really bother me. That's kind of cool actually. But it doesn't bother me. What really bothered me was, okay, could I communicate with God? But ultimately, there was a transition where suddenly it was no longer religion, it was politics. And it was communism which appealed to me, and I was introduced to it by actually another young man, and he introduced me to it, and he talked to me about it and explained some of the principles, and from that point on, I was kind of bought into it for a while. And what appealed to me was it felt like, oh, I see there's things that are wrong with the
Right.
world.
Absolutely.
I've yeah, I've traveled to a lot of places. I've seen suffering. I've been to Indonesia, and I've been to different countries. I biked across Japan. Honestly, there wasn't that much suffering in Japan. It was pretty cool. But the ultimately what I saw here was a problem which needed to be fixed, and I couldn't see that problem being fixed by the current global system, which is by and large is a capitalistic system. Even today, communist China still operates um, kind of a state capitalistic way, where
Right, meaning they're
they
communists
do,
at home, but capitalist
yeah.
on the
They
market.
they they literally have free trade zones in their country, cities which are literally, okay, less restrictions here. You can trade, you can sell, you can build your factories, and you can own it. But ultimately, the goal is to serve the state. Ultimately, but
Can I
either
ask
way,
you a Yeah, can
go
I
ahead.
ask you a question before you move on? Because this part is kind of fascinating to me because I'm seeing more young men jump into more of these extreme ideologies right now.
Sure.
And I
Yeah.
have a theory on this, and I want to get your take on it. I think all men, whether they want to believe it or not, are religious on some level. And if you're not going to fill that hole with God, you're going to find other gods, right? Now, you may persuade yourself that you're not worshiping them, but if we look at communism, it was kind of the deification of the state, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so the other thing is that young men are wired for a struggle, and without a struggle, we'll look for stuff, right? I think this is why we see the LGBTQ stuff coming on, the trans stuff, is because it's a struggle. Do you think that there was any of that in there for you as you look back now as a more mature man and say, could you see any of that there? Did you feel like you were searching for, you said you were searching for God, and then you kind of came to this conclusion that he's not answering me. So was that like a replacement for that?
It kind of, now looking back, it really kind of was. At the same time, I also can't deny that probably during that part of my life, and I recognize this is probably true for many young men in general. that there's a very high degree of alienation where men don't feel usually at place in society. They don't have a place to fit in. Men usually like to be useful. They like to do things. They like to want to feel like they're doing something and doing something that generally does something good. Now, throughout most of history, we haven't reached this degree of alienation that we have today among especially the youth. And when I say alienation, that means, well, alien is foreign, something that separates. So these young men, and including myself, they felt separate from the culture, from the society. They didn't feel like this culture was serving them. They didn't feel like this society, this whatever, whether it's a society, whether it's religion, whether it's a political thing, they didn't feel like it was actually there to help them. They felt that the world was against them, and when the world goes against you, um, everything everything seems like an enemy. And now there are, like, for instance, with communism, that for me, that made the field very clear. That made it very plain. Oh, this is the bad guy. This is the good guy. There was a very clear. I mean, if you want to talk about the cosmology of communism, yeah, there was definitely the evil person. It was the evil industrialist. It was the globalist financiers. It was now that doesn't necessarily mean that you know I was doing much to combat them, but still, it gave me a framework by which to put my world. And now, even with that, that doesn't mean that I didn't learn anything from that phase. I think I learned an awful lot about the world that I wouldn't have otherwise known if I hadn't investigated. Now, obviously, I still do hold a lot of political views which are quite skewed from, I suppose, the majority. Um, However, I guess there's some increasing popularity in some of these views. Uh, for instance, I suppose I don't really like the Federal Reserve very much. I suppose a lot of libertarians would agree with that, though,
And I
and
was gonna
also
say
many
most
conservatives.
people on the right side of the spectrum aren't a fan
No, no, yeah, that's
of the
that's
Fed.
true. That's true. And yeah, and I generally am against globalization in general, and I like I want to I really want to go back to the original principles of the founding fathers now. I want to
Mm,
go back to really ultimately more than that. I want to go back to what Joseph Smith was trying to establish politically, economically.
right.
And
Absolutely.
ultimately that's where my politics lie today. But you
Absolutely.
go from this communism to there, and you were saying, well, back to what you were saying. Well, why do people feel so alien? Why do these young men feel so alienated? Well, the systems have, by design, almost alienated them, separated them from the process of being a part of the nation, from being a part of the republic. They no longer feel like that. And I think when you don't have that, and I do think it does have a religious aspect to it. Of course it has a religious aspect to it. Lots of people, instead of religion, they're turning to politics. And even though political people, I know many political people who say, like, I'm sure Elon Musk or Jordan Peterson, I don't know how religious they are, but they all, I think some of them would fall under the term cultural Christian, where
Mhm.
they culturally agree with the ideas of Christianity, the principles that Christ laid out during his life and tenure on this earth. And but ultimately, for the most part, it's the major center for those cultural Christians is it's the politics, and then the religion comes secondary. And I think
Absolutely.
you see this in lots of places.
Absolutely. All right. Sorry about the side tangent there. I was just curious about that, but you kind of confirmed what I was thinking a little bit. So, so you you kind of dive into communism, Marx, right? And look, m- I want to say this: I'm not a fan of Marx. I'm not a fan of Mao. I think their solutions were horrific on a lot of levels, but
Sure, yeah.
their criticisms were fair criticisms, right? And it's something needs yet to be addressed. And so, but also both of them, especially as you read like the Communist Manifesto, you have to adopt critical theory to really adopt it, right? You always have to have an oppressed class, um, in order to keep it moving. But so you get involved in all this stuff, Freeman. And so how long are you in this phase? And then what brings you out of it?
So now I'm in for quite a few years. And actually, I think it was so I was when I was 18, this is when it started really. It was when it really went deep because when I was 18, that was the year I put got my records removed from the LDS Church.
Yeah.
At that point, I just like, well, why am I a part of a religious organization if I don't believe in God? It was nothing against the LDS Church in particular. Honestly, it had very little to do with that. I think my uncle even took me around, and he was very kind and took me around, talked to me about some things, and he said, "Well, we already have something like communism, like what you're looking for. It's called the law of consecration and the United Order." And my uncle's talking to me about this, and I'm like, and I no one ever told me about the law of consecration or the United Order. So that was very interesting. That was one of the first times my dad would bring up other interesting doctrines, like things that I never heard about, like rebaptism. I never heard about rebaptism. I never heard about the second anointing. When was that? When does that ever happen? And anyways, but these are just in the back of my mind. They weren't front and center for these. I think it was maybe 4 years that I was a communist, maybe a little less. I uh, I slowly, I think, near the end, and I think it was probably around the time I went and I biked across Japan. I kind of actually, weirdly enough, it was the first foray back into religion was actually paganism. And so I was interested in it. It was really more of a philosophical thing than anything else because I don't think any part of me really believed that there was these deities were real. So for a bit, it was more like a distant standpoint.
Almost in like an
And
academic exercise,
yeah,
just
it
learning about it.
was, and I was really fascinated by it for sure. But the interesting thing is, learning about paganism, it wasn't just like one type of paganism or one flavor, although uh, I was attracted to a few different flavors. One of those, eventually, I learned about things like Hermeticism, and I learned about Kabbalah, and these unusual, more esoteric topics, which somehow also had tie-ins back to Christianity. And also, weirdly enough, when I was studying some of these ancient religions, I found so many connections back to Joseph Smith. And it really just made me think over and over again that that's so weird. How did Joseph Smith that these documents weren't published? Joseph Smith couldn't have known. And it was a combination of many things. Eventually I reached the point where I went to my grandfather. And my grandfather is a patriarch of the LDS Church. He's a stake patriarch. And I tell him that, I think I made a mistake somewhere along the line. And I think I want to try to get back and get rebaptized. Can you help me? And of course, he's open to that. He's open to helping me. Why wouldn't he be? And he's very kind. He's a very generous man too. Um, this is the same guy for to give you context. This is the guy who wrote Saturday's Warrior, if you know that play.
He wrote that?
He Oh yeah, he did. And I think Saturday's Warrior is very interesting for at least for how it frames some things about the pre-existence, some things
Yeah.
that I don't know, some things that I have taken to eventually, believe more firmly today. But, uh but either way, through this grandfather, he would teach me a lot of things. The missionaries were invited over, and I was learning things. It came to a point where I was staying at his house for some time. My parents at this point had been divorced. They divorced around the time when I was about 18, 19-ish, maybe 20. Um, but I was staying at my grandfather's house and I was learning. And well, it just so happens that, my grandfather being a patriarch, and he had the whole set of the Journal of Discourses. And I was like, "Oh, well, great. Hey, look, more cool stuff to read." And of course, I'm learning about things, and it's not like I hadn't heard about some of these doctrines. It's not like I hadn't heard about the Adam God doctrine or the law of consecration. Some of them are more recent to me, but when I started reading about them in those journals of discourses, I started, wait, what about this, Grandpa? What about this? And I actually asked him about the Adam God doctrine once, and he tells me, well, I'll tell you my story. And he tells me his story of how he was, I believe it was BYU. He went to BYU, he studied there, and he had a project or assignment or something like that, and he got to reading through some of the archives, some of the records, and he read some stuff about the Adam God doctrine. So he had the same kinds of questions. Well, what about this Adam God doctrine? Does it mean anything? Is it true? Does it pertain to us? Are we supposed to be, should we be learning about it? Or is it just something else? And he actually goes to a general authority. Now, I don't remember if it was a 70 or a 12 that he went to, apostle, that is. But he goes up to this man and he asks, well, what about this? And the answer he gets, which he essentially repeats to me, is, well, it's very interesting. It might or might not be true, but it does not pertain to your salvation, and you don't need to be concerned with it.
I see.
And essentially that's what he passed down, something which, more kind of ambiguous, and but also firmly stating it doesn't pertain to your salvation. Now, that's a little bit. Didn't help me that much at all, though. That just made me more curious. Well, okay, what about this? What about that? And then I remember, okay, well, wait. And I read something. Didn't Joseph Smith say that? No, I'm not going to get this word for word. But the first principle of the gospel is to know and understand the character and nature of God. And oh, Brigham Young knew a little bit about that. And where did he get it from? Well, it turns out he got it from Joseph Smith. And that's the Adam God doctrine. And so I'm learning about these doctrines. I learned about quite a few. And they start to come into conflict with the LDS view. So I get to investigating, okay, well, and this is kind of a weird point because I'm staying at my grandpa's house, but I get to investigating, okay, well, if not the LDS Church, who has the priesthood? Because that's what I'm looking for. I want to know who has the authority. And something ring to me, and it rings to me today, by their fruits ye shall know them. So I went and I looked, okay, well, do any of the Eastern branches, the Community of Christ, Temple Law, even the Strangites, do any of them live up to the standards that Joseph Smith laid before himself, laid before the people at the time? And by and large, those Eastern branches, they've cut themselves off.
Mhm.
And then I looked east. I man, I even looked at and I thought about the Church of the Potter Christ. And I don't know if you know who that guy is. but he said he
Yeah,
was
I do
Jesus
not.
Christ. He said he was Jesus Christ, and he basically came around the time of Joseph Smith, a little bit after, I think, and he said, you know, I'm going to ascend to heaven on this day. So he goes up to a cliff. All his followers follow him, and he jumps. And on that day, the Church of the Potter Christ was disbanded. Now, I won't necessarily tell you if he rose on that day, but the fact remains that his church isn't around anymore to tell the tale.
Right. Right.
So, so yeah, I did get into investigating, and of course, eventually, it would lead to fundamentalism. Okay, there's a bunch of these groups. There's a lot of fundamentalists. There's no shortage of fundamentalists, and there's no shortage of fundamentalists who claim they have true authority. But the thoughts come by their fruits ye shall know them. And I thought, okay, well, I do believe that if they are true servants of Christ, that they should be living the gospel that Christ taught. All right, which ones of them among these people? And there's two criteria, only two. I only needed two criteria. Which one of them did missionary work to win out? Will go out and teach and preach the gospel as Christ did. Well, that right there would eliminate almost all of them. And now, for instance, there are some groups like the AUB who get around it by saying, "Oh, the LDS Church did the missionary work." That's that's great for them, but for me, that wasn't what I was looking for. And then the other criteria was, do they have any temples? And there was a kind of a third criteria, and the third criteria was also like, can I even join them? Now, because I even considered the FLDS, but I don't think they'd let me join, even if I
Mhm.
wanted to. Now, I'm sure that if someone really, really, really wanted to and spent years trying to get in, I bet you could find someone who could get in if they really wanted to. But I I took that as the doors are closed. Now, uh, there just so happened, and it was actually a friend. He lives in Canada, I think BC, and he sent me a link one day over the web, and he said, "Well, what about this church?" And that's how I came to Christ Church, the Righteous Branch.
Okay.
And well, they have missionaries, and they do temple work, and they are open for converts. Now, those three things alone, those opened it up. And not only were they doing temple work, they were the first fundamentalists to do temple work. And that was really big. In my book, that's really big. That shows me that these people were doing they were they were laboring, and they had fruits. And their fruits were pretty clear to see, at least for me. But all of this up to this point was just an intellectual thing.
Mhm.
This was just me intellectually, okay, looking at the data, looking at the charts. This is something which I'm used to. I like information. I like knowledge. I like history. And looking at it all and sifting through it, oh, it's easy. It's like, oh, does it do this? No. Does it do that? Yes. Okay, I'll put it in that category. It was all just categorization. I had not in my whole life, and it returned to the same problem. The whole reason why I didn't I left the LDS church. I couldn't talk to God. I didn't even know how to get any answers. And so I thought, well, if I'm going to join any kind of religion, I want to be certain. I want to be certain that it's where God wants me to go, that God is behind this move. And I'd been praying. I'd been praying for him to show me what to do, for him to show me where his priesthood was. And one night I got the answer where I was brought before a place in my dream. This place was a building in a desert. There's many people I didn't know. And we were all shuffled into this building. And we lined up in 3 rows. And a man, he comes and he walks in front of us. I notice as I'm standing there's a vessel of water. And the water's murky. It's almost like mud, a mud or a soup. It's like a sludge. And I'm staring at this vessel of water. And he comes to me. He's going to people and he's stopping in front of them and he stops in front of me. And this man, he does something with his hands, maybe similar to the sign of the cross, but maybe not exactly the same. And he says something, which I don't remember or don't know if I even heard anything. Because the only thing that came to my mind or rang in my ears, which is more like, it wasn't necessarily my ears, it was inside my head, was baptism. And as I'm staring at this vessel, the mud drains out, and all that's left is a clear vessel. It was clear to me, at least then, that something needed to be done with this baptism thing that I'd heard so much about, and that I'd already been baptized before. I was actually baptized in the LDS Church in Italy, so of all places. But I I go out from this dream. I wake up, and I'm in a cold sweat. I don't wake up from dreams in a cold sweat. I don't freak out from dreams that much unless they're a nightmare, and this was no nightmare. I wasn't freaked out about this. There's no lion coming to eat my head before I wake up. And I know there's something I have to do. So I eventually will call the missionaries. I'll call the mission president and I'll organize some things. And it's within the month, within about 1 or 2 months, that I head out to where the saints are gathered in Christ Church. And that's in the middle of the desert, central Nevada. And I decide, okay, I'll head out there. So I head out there. We head down a road, pass, and eventually go on a dirt road, and start seeing some trees approach us. And the first sign of civilization I see, the first sign of life, besides plants, is a truckload of children just driving down the road. And at least right then and there, I thought, well, great. At least I know it's not just a bunch of old people. And that was one of the worries.
Mhm.
Now, my dad also had some warnings. He's a little bit more crass, crude with his words. He warned me also, not, hey, Freeman, don't join a sausage party. That was his warning. And I said, okay, Dad, okay. But honest,
Meaning don't join a group where there was heavily male versus female.
exactly, exactly. That was his warning, and that was his caution. And I said, okay, Dad, okay, whatever. I know. But really, at the end of the day, more than that was I wanted to find who had the authority. It didn't matter if it was 2 guys in the desert, it didn't matter if it was a group of 10 who lived in a jungle in Peru. I wanted to find them. I wanted to go to them. And I just to skip ahead a little bit after approaching this community and talking to some of the people I believe who have even come on your podcast, such as Dan and Ann. I don't know if either of them have been on the podcast,
Yeah.
but these these people I get associated with, I learn from, and then I step into the waters of baptism. What's interesting about the font room is just like in the dream, there were 3 lines of people because in the font room there's 3 lines of chairs. I thought that was unusual. honestly didn't think about it at the time of the baptism. I was too concerned with, too nervous about the people, about the baptism, about what if everything will go right. And but I noticed it later. I get in, I go under, I come up, and I get I get baptized. I walk up the stairs out of the font, and I get dried off a bit, and we do both the prayer and the closing song. But during the prayer, I open my eyes, and in front of me, standing over the font in the air, was a man. And this man, he was clothed in white. He had a white beard and white hair, and really very blue eyes. And he was dressed in white, and he approached me. I did not recognize him. I did not know who this was. He didn't claim anything. He didn't say anything. He didn't pretend to be something he wasn't. All he did was he embraced me. And wow, when he embraced me, I knew that meant something. That was what I needed. And I was about to break into tears in front of a whole bunch of people that I hardly knew. So I tell the missionaries, I say, I go to one of them, one of them, and I say, hey, because I was going to stay over. I said, hey, could I go to the place where I'm staying overnight? I'm feeling a bit tired. Now, I was actually tired. It was no lie. That would be horrible if I lied the very first thing after I stepped out of baptism. But he tells me, yeah, well, we'll take you there. And so I go there, and then I basically cry and thank God, because for the first time in my life, I knew where I was going. I knew where I needed to be. I knew what I needed to do. Less than a year later, I I joined the mission, and I became a missionary for Christ Church. Now, because of that, I think I went to over 22 US states. I talked to a plethora of people from all walks of life, from all different branches of fundamentalism, from all different religions. And I now I'm sure I baptized or helped baptize a fair number, but all those I attribute to God. And all the honor and glory goes to him, because I wouldn't have been in that position to do those things if he hadn't helped me get to those waters of baptism. But it's from there that I came, and now here where I am. And I mean, I've always been interested since even on the mission. I've been interested in scholarly things. I gave a talk about the lost tribes of Israel at the Book of Mormon Evidence Conference. So too did I give a talk, this very similar talk, at the Restoration Torah Conference. That one was actually first. I had given, and then I just recently, just this last year, I gave another talk at the Journal of Mormon Polygamy Conference, where I've written a paper um, just about the 1886 revelation and the Council of Friends. So now, kind of, yeah, that's kind of
That
where I
brings you
was, where I am, and that's
that
here.
brings you up now, right?
Yep, that brings
To
us up to date.
you're now married woman to a woman who's in the branch and have a child and just going, what was it like when you told your parents like, "Hey, um, I'm gonna be a Mormon fundamentalist?" Were they like, "Well, at least he's not a communist anymore?" Like what was their response to that? Because it's a bit unnerving, right? When you start talking about, "Yeah, I'm gonna be a fundamentalist." For most people, the first thing that comes to mind is like Warren Jeffs, right?
Yeah, of course.
Did they have any of those misgivings?
So, um, I think both of my parents, all in all, both of my parents were very, very, very accepting, and they honestly didn't. They weren't that worried about it. They they at the end of the day, they really at that point I was an adult. I could manage myself. I had a job. I was doing this and doing that. Okay, that's good. And if that's where I wanted to go, they were fine with it. My dad had actually had interactions with fundamentalism. He of course, living in St. George, every now and then you're going to see people who are from the
Sure.
FLDS, so you know about it. You're aware. You're at least tangentially aware because Short Creek isn't even an hour away. So that's but they weren't really that concerned. I think my grandparents, I think they definitely had concerns. Uh, I think there were times there was a little bit here and there, but overall, I've I haven't experienced a bunch of negativity, not in any major way at all. And I think I count myself lucky in that part that at least my family doesn't wish to ostracize me. So yeah, that's where I stand on that, and I count myself blessed.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, good stuff, man. I appreciate that. And that kind of gives people an idea who you are and where you came from. So you're a convert to this whole fundamentalist thing like I am. And boy, I just see more and more people getting interested as time goes along. I don't think it's quite as taboo as what it used to be.
Oh,
And
yeah.
given the rest of the society, most of us look like Ozzy and Harriet these days. Very a little more traditional than normal. But well,
Yeah.
no, that's good. So I guess from here, man, let's roll into this Revelations. Joseph Smith, 33. Now, before we get in there, I do want to just plug this again. So again, this is the restored version. It was compiled by Drew Briney. And what it is it's a set of scriptures that includes the 1840 Book of Mormon, the 1844 Doctrine and Covenants, and the 1851 Pearl of Great Price. In addition to that, there the doctrines back in the Doctrine and Covenants with the lectures on faith, and also 125 uncanonized revelations. So for the LDS folks who listen out there, pick one of these up. They're darn I don't know how Drew managed to get the price point where he did. That was incredible. I think it's like 65 bucks. And if you just go in there and you type in when you check out, they'll give you an option for a promo code. Just type Renegade in there and you're going to get an extra 10% off. But you guys definitely want this. And for those of you who are serious scholars in the LDS Church, um, there there's a lot in there to digest and a whole lot more. And if you're wanting revelation you haven't read before, I can't tell you how this set of scriptures will help you. But anyway, we're on to Joseph Smith 33, and that's page 526 in the
Yeah.
restored version there. So um, and this is where it's gonna get really fun because now we're gonna get into Book of Mormon geography. So, and this is always awesome. So, um, real quick, Freeman, do you want to give us some maybe historical context around this, if you have any? Who's the guy that wrote it, or because it comes out of somebody's diaries, if I'm not mistaken. Do you have any of that
Yeah.
information by
Yeah.
chance?
No, I do have some of that information, but I suppose, you know, just before I get into that, I do want to, laud Drew Briney and many of the people who've brought this together, who have put forth funding. Um, I know one of my good friends, Michael, he put a lot of effort and funding into it, and a lot of other people have put a lot of effort into it. I think even to a degree you were involved, at least to some degree, and
No.
you weren't. Oh, okay. Sorry, I
No,
was
no,
mistaken.
the most I knew about is Drew had told me about what he was working on, but I didn't do much with it. So, no, I'm not gonna
Well,
take
sure,
any
yeah.
credit for that.
Oh, okay, okay. Yeah, all right. Well, anyways, either way, I think it's a great work, and I've taken lots of the teens in my church. I teach a class, and we've actually gone through every single one of the additional revelations that have been added
Good.
here, and it was during that time when I actually came across 33. But really, now kind of get into the history
Yeah.
because Joseph Smith 33, it's an uncanonized revelation. And now Drew, he has stated that he has put, if anything is considered revelation, if someone that considers it revelation, he puts it in there.
Correct.
Now, some of these people are going to have disagreements. Is this revelation? Is this not? At least one person I know sees any of these revelations as a revelation. The question really here is, who does it come from? Is it inspired? Does it come from God? Does it come from Joseph Smith? Or is this just speculation that was going around on the day? And the first time we actually get it is, I believe, a document that was penned, that we know it was penned by Frederick G. Williams. Um, Now, this was seemingly, Frederick G. Williams seemingly wrote these down during the Kirtland era. So it was, and there was four other statements on there. All four other statements are about they're about translation. There's a copy of D&C 7, what would become D&C 7, not yet published. There's Jacob 5:13 and Jacob 7:27 with Hebrew renderings on there. And
Mhm.
then it says, so all these kind of concern translation. And there's some idea that this could have been written down during the school of the prophets. That's one idea. That during the school of the prophets, Frederick G. Williams could have written it down. Now, does that mean it came from Joseph Smith? Does that mean it could have been talked by, because it wasn't just Joseph Smith talking during the school of the prophets. But either way, Frederick G. Williams writes it down. And I think right now is a good time to probably read what the text says.
Absolutely. Let's do that.
Because, and it says right here, this is now I'm going to read the text directly from the Williams holograph, which is going to be slightly different from, I don't know how different, probably not very different at all. Probably just punctuation and spelling. And it says, the course that Lehi traveled from the city of Jerusalem to the place where he and his family took ship. They traveled nearly a southeast direction until they came to the 19th degree of north latitude, then nearly east to the Sea of Arabia, then sailed in a southeast direction and landed on the continent of South America in Chile, 30 degrees south latitude.
That
Now
is
that
verbatim.
covers, that is verbatim. I read from the original manuscript, and the basically the difference there is probably the biggest difference. He doesn't spell latitude right. He has three T's instead of two. That's all. That's really all. So the corrections there are the our spelling, and that's about it. And so before I dive into really and break down those parts, because some of those details a lot of people already agree with. Most people who talk about Book of Mormon geography, they're going to agree with at least the first half of those claims. The idea that Lehi and his family went through Arabia, uh, eventually going east and ending at Oman, somewhere around the coast of Oman today, which is in southeast Arabia. And that is kind of about where the agreements end. Now, there are some people who actually even disagree with this idea, and I can mention them briefly later. But even this idea that Lehi and his family could have gone to China. Now, that's a whole nother idea. That's a whole nother concept. But I have heard it. I have heard it spoken of at least before.
Oh, yeah. No, I've heard ones where, like, some guy has postulated that they wound up in Baja California.
Oh
Um,
yeah, yeah. Well, that's the narrow
yeah,
neck of land. You see, you found it.
correct, because there can only be one narrow neck of land on the entire world. Um, No, you're right. There are a ton of different models out there for this. Heartlander and Mesoamerica or South America tend to be the two major models. Everybody else is fighting hard for third place. So
Yeah.
yeah, no, it is interesting that it just keeps to seem to be expanding.
No, it really does. It really does. And honestly, uh, the thing is, we have to. That's kind of why a text like this um, is important, at least in kind of understanding where those arguments are coming from, who is saying what, and why they are saying it. Now, I want to go back to the textual history
Okay.
because the there is later on we have something else published. There is a so let's see. There's a few other facts I want to go over. One, there's a near identical Oliver Cowdery document that contains items 2 and 3. So it doesn't actually contain the Lehi's travel part. But Oliver Cowdery has a document which does contain something very similar and exactly the same, just only part of the document.
You
Um,
Are you in a spot where you can share that? I can grant you permissions to share your screen if you do.
um, I don't have it on screen with
Okay.
me. I've just written these things down. If something I might be able to search for something quickly, but I don't know if
Oh,
I can
no, no,
find it super easily.
you're fine. If you could just maybe send me a list of where you found them, and I'll put them in the show notes so people
Oh
can
yeah,
check
sure,
our people
of course,
can do their own
and
research.
yeah, and I would, and some of the things I'm probably going to go over. Ultimately, some of these are going to rely on my memory. My memory
Okay.
is not perfect. Remember that I am man, and man is I have a lot of fault. I've told people facts, things that I thought were facts about history, and then 2 days later, I read about that same historical point and realize, "Oh, no,
Dude,
that was
I'm not
totally off."
yeah, no, totally. I'm not trying to play gotcha games or anything like
Yeah,
that. I like to have them. It's fun to go back and piece it all together.
yeah, and so, the, eventually, this document was loaned to from Ezra G. Williams to Apostle George A. Smith in 1864. This document wasn't ever returned, as far as we know. They tried to recover it. They failed. They never got it back. The church kept that document, and ultimately there was a, I believe it was, I could be wrong. I think it was Willard Richards. Uh, Williams. Let me double check. But I think, I think it was so let me just say where I got it from, which is a compendium of the doctrines of the gospel, which is on page 2989. And this is actually where the biggest claim of it being a revelation comes from. It's from this book by Richards and Little, where it says, it changes the text slightly. It's just small changes, really. It has this foreword. It says Lehi's travels, revelation to Joseph the seer. That's how it starts. And there's the slight difference. The biggest difference is the place of their destination instead of the place where he and his family took ship. Those are the biggest differences. Overall, the text maintains everything. It hasn't really changed, especially its meaning. It's changed only in that it's prefaced to seem and to be clarified as a revelation.
Okay. So let me stop
Go
you
ahead.
right there because I want to make sure I'm understanding here just for a second, Freeborn. So, or excuse me, Freeman.
Yeah.
So there, the one that Drew has included comes from the Bernheisel manuscript.
Yes.
The document that you're referring to is a different document, right? Is this a second kind of copy of this revelation, or made in somebody else's diary, or is this simply somebody else copying Bernheisel's manuscript?
So the Bernheisel manuscript. Now, this is another interesting thing. I was going to get into this actually, and
Sorry.
that's a good point that you brought up there, because Bernheisel, the Bernheisel manuscript is a copy of Joseph Smith's inspired translation of the Bible.
Mhm.
And on one of the pages, I think in the back somewhere, or one of the pages, the revelation is written word for word. I think also, I could be wrong if there's spelling errors were maintained, but either way, it was written there. And I have it in my notes here. He copied the statement on the last sheet of his partial copy of the Joseph Smith translation after several blank pages, and there's nothing else added. It's just word for word the same thing. That's all it
Okay.
is. It seems like he copied from Williams, from Frederick G. Williams.
Okay.
That's where he got it. That's where we think he got it. It's unlikely he got it from other sources. And the difference in time here, the Williams document is 1830s. The Bernheisel manuscript's 1840s, 1844 or 5, I believe.
So
So
they're
there is
fairly
quite a yeah,
contemporaneous.
they're fairly contemporary, but there is a difference in time. This is late Joseph Smith. Joseph Smith possibly already have died, and compare that to this is like church just barely starting out, people just starting to go do things, and this this text is preserved in those two places, really, in those two forms. There's just two different versions, and they're basically say the same thing. One is just prefaced as a revelation.
Okay. So as you've gone through the history, what's your opinion on it? Just curious. And it look, this falls in the realm of opinion. No one's holding
Yeah,
anybody
yeah.
to anything. Do you think that this is two separate recollections, or do you think that this is one recollection that Bernheisel copied from Williams?
So I think this is it. Now that's actually where it probably gets a little complicated, because this is not the only time that in the early church that this idea, at least of a landing place in Chile, was discussed. It wasn't the. In fact, this isn't even the first time. Even though the um, Frederick G. Williams wrote that down in, I think 36, 1836, I think is the date.
Mhm.
We actually have accounts as early as November of 1830. This is the same year the church was established, where this is Oliver Cowdery. In the Observer and Telegraph, which was published in Hudson, Ohio, November 18th, 1830, it is titled The Golden Bible, or Campbellism Improved. Oliver Cowdery talks, or seemingly comes from Oliver Cowdery's preaching, where it says, Lehi and his family, and I'm adding Lehi and his family, but they landed on the coast of Chile 600 years before the coming of Christ, and from them descended all the Indians of America. So we have this very, very early idea from Oliver Cowdery, who he was second in command of Joseph Smith.
Was
He
he
was
quoting Joseph in any of that? Is there any
we don't know.
indication? Okay.
We don't know if he was quoting Joseph Smith. All we know is this is very early on. Oliver Cowdery is, of course, involved in the translation of the Book of Mormon. He's there with Joseph Smith. He gets baptized by Joseph Smith. He's there from the get go, and he talks about this very early on. So this makes me think, well, maybe there could have been potentially, um, it could have started here. It could have started there in 1830 November, with Oliver Cowdery preaching it. Now, where did Oliver Cowdery get it from? Did he get it from Joseph Smith in any way? Could Joseph Smith have been teaching it later in the school of the prophets. Those are both those are possibilities that Joseph Smith taught it independently to Oliver Cowdery, and then later on taught it in the school of the prophets, and then they wrote it down. So Williams wrote it down there. So I do want to also now bring up the biggest. Okay, now could it have actually been inspired revelation from someone else? And the biggest actually candidate for that isn't even Oliver Cowdery. It's actually Frederick G. Williams.
Mm.
Because Frederick G. Williams's family actually does claim some of it, at least to a degree. It starts with Ezra G. Williams, where he says he's talking about this document about Lehi's travels, and also about the other notes of interest on the paper that was on the one about Lehi's travels. And but he says this paper is in the handwriting of my father, Fred G. Williams. The characters thereon I believe to be a representation of those shown to him at the dedication of the Kirtland Temple, signed Ezra G. Williams. So Ezra G. Williams, this is an interesting statement because it could be talking about the characters that relate to the dedication and not necessarily the note statement about Lehi at all. It could have been that Frederick G. Williams was using this paper multiple times and he used it at the dedication and used it at other places too. Either way, later on we get this repeat claim and kind of even building upon it. So it seems like this claim where it's kind of like where Ezra G. Williams kind of has that ambiguous. He believes it was at the dedication of the Kirtland Temple. He doesn't know for sure. He's even leaving some ambiguity there. But later on, it says there, right, Merlin J. Stone interviewed Henrietta E. Williams, and this is 1913.
How is she related to, like, Ezra and is it Frederick?
So I believe, if I could be wrong, but I believe Henrietta is a granddaughter. I could be wrong, but this is talking about the revelation, talking about where it comes from, and she's being interviewed.
Mhm.
And it says F.G. Williams claimed that at the time of receiving the revelation, an angel appeared to him and sat between F.G. Williams and Joseph Smith. Senior F.G. Williams then transcribed the message on paper, which he kept during his lifetime, and Miss Williams kept this paper sacred until her demise. Then it came into the possession of Dr. E.G. Williams, which is Ezra, who loaned it to Apostle George A. Smith, and Mr. and Mrs. Williams since tried several times to secure the manuscript, but were unsuccessful. The revelation later appeared in print in the compendium, page 289, and was erroneously accredited to Joseph Smith, the prophet. So
Interesting.
this is this is in 1913. This is late. This is almost 100 years
About 80 years,
after
yeah.
80 years. This is quite a significant time. The people involved are definitely dead. And but this is a family claim, and I'm not doubting that there can be a family or oral tradition maintained by the family, and the family probably knows more than most people do about certain situations. But I think it really interesting because it does talk about right there. I want to. It says an angel appeared to him. It was between Frederick G. Williams and Joseph Smith Senior,
That was
and
the
so it's
part that
between those
jumped out to me.
is an angel. Now, this angel is later actually clarified by at least one other person. This is from memory, that this angel is actually Jesus Christ that was appearing between these two men, and that is where he received the note about Lehi's travels. is from Jesus Christ. So there's these two different sources, two different potential sources. Joseph Smith either gave the revelation or Frederick G. Williams received the revelation directly from Jesus Christ. And it's actually when the experience is repeated to Joseph Smith by Joseph Smith Sr. and Frederick G. Williams. Um, the Joseph Smith actually is the one that's saying that, oh, you that was Jesus Christ. So it was Joseph Smith saying that they met Jesus Christ. Now, of course, when Joseph that document that says that Joseph Smith says it was Jesus Christ doesn't necessarily say anything about the Lehi's Travels document at all. And the only note that we have about this, the Lehi's Travels being a revelation to Frederick G. Williams, is here. It could be that these two stories are being combined in the memory of the family. And it could also be that Joseph Smith received it and gave it in some place like the School of the Prophets. So we're in a really interesting place here with the text. And now going to what I think personally. Now, these are my views. Personally, I think this is most likely inspired. It
Mm.
is most likely inspired, and I think it is inspired from a good source. And all the evidence points to whether it was received by Frederick G. Williams or by Joseph Smith directly and taught to people at the time. It seems that it ultimately begins very early on in the church, this idea of where Lehi was going and where he landed. How he came to America is seemingly very, very clearly established among the early saints. Generally, they now whether there's another alternative, there's another claim, of course, that Lehi landed a little south of the Isthmus of Darien. Now, for people who don't know, that's like close to around northern Colombia, southern Panama. It's dense little area of jungle, and he's saying a little south of the Isthmus of Darien. Either way, both point to a South American landing. Two different landing points, though. One 30 degrees south, and one just a little south of the Isthmus of Darien. Now, it seems to me clear that Chile is taught over and over again as the landing point. But later on, I think more people start speculating and start saying, okay, maybe this or that. And people start coming up with more ideas. I think even there's multiple attributions to many different authors or many different people, many different general authorities who say, oh, this happened here or this happened there. Or like the Magdalena River in Colombia is the river's Sidon. And it was right in Colombia, or was it Colombia? Yeah, Colombia, where that's where Zarahemla was. Or Zarahemla was in Guatemala, or might have been in Guatemala. And or Zarahemla was here or there, or Zarahemla was where Joseph Smith revealed the name of this place, which I believe is in closer to the Heartland theory. I believe it's in Iowa, if I'm not mistaken. Um, but these are all different places where Zarahemla could have been, and of course, all this ties and tracks right back to the question of, okay, where did the Book of Mormon happen? Well, we don't know from the Book of Mormon text alone necessarily. We don't clearly have a very certain idea. And I think it was even said, uh, um, no, I'm just paraphrasing here, where the theories about where the Book of Mormon could have happened are as broad as the continent itself. And I believe I could be wrong about who that comes from, but I think that is that's from the time of Heber J. Grant when that statement came out. But you can tell that, and that's pretty early in the church. That's not even 100 years after the founding. And we're already coming to this point where, okay, we don't even know this or that. I think, if it's all right, do you want to investigate any further of the textual evidence? Do you have any questions about more of the textual evidence, or what
I think
more do
we
you
got
want
a
to go over
pretty
there?
good feeling on the text, right? I think you did a really good job there of kind of both showing why you think it's inspired, plus its criticisms, right? Why it might not be inspired. So I feel like we got a good idea there. But I do want to get into what this means, right? So, like, you take it that that's their landing place somewhere down by Chile. And if that's the case, then do you then make the hypothesis, or should the hypothesis be made that that's where the book of the majority of the Book of Mormon events took place was South America?
So now that's a good question. I don't think that this text would limit you to that kind of a view. I don't think in any way it would. Now, if you do accept this as, you know, as true as any other doctrine, if you accept it as doctrine, you're going to at the very least, at the very minimum, the only real requirement is that the landing point is in South America. Now, this still opens up, okay, the Nephites did not stay near their landing point. They moved. They were forced, and we were told where they went. They went north. Now, how far north is the question. Now, that's
Right.
where you get divisions. Personally, I stick to almost a hemispheric model, essentially, where I think the Book of Mormon, the events, they certainly start in South America. Um, they don't end in South America, though. I think the travels, they continue on and they go all the way northward. I think it is really interesting. Um, there is a place now. I don't know if you're familiar with Mosiah Hancock,
I am.
but he actually even talked about where Joseph Smith said a certain place was, because Joseph Smith said, "Oh yeah, this is where the Nephites lost their power." And if you'd like, I'll read the
Yeah,
revelation.
please do.
This is he says, the next day
Where
the prophet came. Goes, go
where are
ahead.
you taking this from? Where's this
So
coming from?
this is I believe the Mosiah Hancock Journal,
Okay.
and I have a copy of the Mosiah Hancock Journal. I've just written this down here. It says, the next day the prophet came to our home and stopped in our carpenter shop and stood by the turning lathe. I went and got my map for him. Now, he said, I will show you the travels of this people. That he and then again, I also want to recommend people who haven't read Mosiah Hancock's journal. It's very good. It really is, and it really does show there's a lot of information in there about Joseph Smith that a lot of people just don't know, just because it's not written in any official church publications, and it's contained in a journal like Mosiah Hancock's journal or so and so's journal. Like the great journal would be Wilford Woodruff's. Either way, continuing on, he has this map on the table. So Mosiah Hancock's asking, he's bringing the map out, and Joseph Smith is going to show him something. Now I will show you the travels of this people. He then showed our travels through Iowa and said, here you will make a place for the winter, and here you will travel west until you come to the valley of the Great Salt Lake. You will build cities to the north and to the south, and to the east and to the west, and you will become a great and wealthy people in that land. But the United States will not receive you with the laws which God desires you to live, and you will have to go to where the Nephites lost their power.
Have you ever wished that you could sit down with the very scriptures that Joseph Smith approved and feel the Spirit as clearly as the early saints did? Well, with the restored version of the scriptures, you can do just that. The restored version is the most historically transparent, spiritually rich triple combination ever published. This single volume gives you the pure 1840 Book of Mormon, the complete 1844 Doctrine and Covenants, including all 7 lectures on faith that were removed in 1921, and the 1851 Pearl of Great Price, exactly as Joseph Smith left them. But it doesn't stop there. It also restores 125 additional revelations given through Joseph Smith and early brethren in the church that fulfills the Lord's commission that revelations should be kept up to date. Now, there's no heavy columns, no constant cross-referencing interrupting the flow, just clean modern paragraphing with discrete mini-verses so you can read for the pure joy of it and still use it in study groups or class. Every change Joseph made is carefully footnoted so that you can see the revelatory process for yourself, beautifully bound in gold or silver edges and built to last for years of daily scripture study. The restored version is more than just a book. It is a return to the pure doctrine that Joseph was commanded to give us. Now, you might expect to pay upwards of $150, maybe even $200 for this kind of scripture, but it's available right now at restoredversion.com for only $59.98. But at checkout, if you type in the code RENEGADE, you're going to get 10% off. Again, visit restoredscriptures.com and come feast on the words of the Lord through Joseph Smith once again.
Now, this land that he's talking about is where the future territory of Deseret is. And saying you will go to the land where the Nephites lost their power. I believe that's talking about this area, this region, the southwestern portion of the United States, essentially. This is where the Nephites lost their power. If we accept this also as gospel, well, you've got a position in South America and you've got a position in North America. Now, obviously, just like any text, this text can also be criticized. This whole idea comes from Mosiah Hancock, so it's a secondhand source, of course. It's claiming a lot of things that obviously happened to the saints. It's easy for people can obviously say, well, it's easy for Mosiah Hancock to just retroactively say, oh, we went here and there because maybe he wrote this later. And this now applies to present day, therefore kind of proving, yeah, Joseph Smith knew where we were going to go. And it's also, by the way, land of desolation. But the limitation of this revelation doesn't limit you to, okay, I have to accept a South American model. I think there's a lot of credit where credit's due to people who have done research about the South American model, about the Andean model, as it's sometimes called.
Mm-hmm.
Because now you don't really find any evidence of ironworking anywhere outside of the Andes pre-Columbian. You don't find any pre-Columbian ironworks or ironworking outside of the Andes. Mind you, the ironworkings that are in the Andes are not necessarily, we don't have evidence of them using the iron to make tools, but we do have evidence that the iron is being mined by the people in the Andes. We have further evidence pointing to, okay, where if God were to put these people, Lehi's family, anywhere where their animals, where their plants would grow, where their animals would find a good climate, there's not very many places that match the Mediterranean climate in the United States. I believe there's probably 2. Now, one of the options is California, and the other option is Chile. And there's a small region in Chile, which is at the 30th degree parallel, where there is actually a very amenable, a very Mediterranean climate. Now Chile is a long country, so obviously the whole country is not Mediterranean. And just because the Nephites started there and were able to raise some grain, raise some food, raise some animals, that doesn't mean they stopped there and they weren't able to spread northwards, which the text clearly says they did. Um, but yeah, I don't know if you have any pushback or anything to say about that.
Well, we do have the account, right? And this doesn't speak to a landing place, but this does seem to speak to where some of the events of the Book of Mormon are happening, right? We do have Joseph per, Hancock's recollection saying this is the place where they lost their power, pointing to
Yeah,
Utah, the American Southwest. But we also have another interesting uh place where Joseph is on Zion's camp and he writes a letter back to Emma. And he says, "We are riding across the plains of the Nephites," and I'm paraphrasing here, "and we're seeing their bones strewn about." Like, the only way that that fits, this revelation, or yeah, this revelation, or recollection, or however you want to put it, holds water, is if that is simply the point of origin, right? The point of first contact in the new world would be Chile, and then, like you said, they migrate north. It's a big migration, right? That's 5,300 miles.
yeah,
um
no, it's a huge
it's a
migration.
huge chunk.
No doubt about that.
However, right, and this is when someone asks me where it happened, personally, I have my own opinions, and I try not to share those, at least on here. Um, in full disclosure, I'm kind of a soft heartlander in terms of I think there's probably more than just the heartland. I think given Joseph's description of things, I don't think there's two hill Comoras or anything else. Um, it does lead me to believe that most of the primary events we read about are probably heartland. However, and this goes back to your point, it's awfully interesting when you start finding Michigan copper down in Central and South America. What's
Yeah.
it doing down there? Um, Much of that, I think, is trade, right? I think, and we know we're starting to figure out that. I know it's crazy. It's a crazy thought here, Freeman, but really, archaeology, for only being around 100 years, they really don't have it all figured out. We've seen other historical narratives about mankind's past being pushed back, right? Clovis first was a major model for a lot of years. That's been pushed back. Certainly, sites like Göbekli Tepe over in Turkey have set this back, set the clock back quite a ways.
Oh, yeah.
Um, and so this idea of, archaeology doesn't have it all figured out, I agree with 100%. But one thing is true, and that is where you have trade, you also have trade of ideas and concepts. And so if the Nephites were trading with other peoples that were down in Central America or something like that, I don't see why it is they wouldn't have Nephite outposts down there as well. Um, I think it's a silly idea that it's contained, you know what I mean? And again, none of this should affect anybody's testimony. If you got a smoking gun tomorrow on some Mesoamerican wall saying, "Hey, I'm Nephi and I scribbled this down in, 600 BC," we should all be, slapping high fives, right? Because it's true. Not that that should affect that, but we definitely, it's fun to talk about. So I would say that Joseph does seem um to certainly point to North America for a lot of the cardinal events that happen in the Book of Mormon. But again, I'm willing to be wrong on that.
No, and hey, that's a fair point. I honestly, so with that being said, I think a lot of these facts are clearly up for debate. You mentioned, what was it? You mentioned the, copper in Michigan
Hmm.
that is found all the way down here and there. Now they've also done, interestingly enough, well, they found Michigan copper in over in the old world.
Hmm.
They found evidence of it. It's very clear because you can in geology. You can take a rock and you can analyze its mineral content and compare it to mineral content in other places. And the mineral content of this copper, because it has certain impurities, is clearly Michigan copper. Now, the whole idea that people don't have the ability to travel is kind of an old idea, I think, in a lot of ways, that people
Mhm.
can't figure things out. You had Phoenicians rounding the Cape of Good Hope in Africa thousands of years ago. This is before
And
we had a
those are
compass. They're
those
using the
are harsh.
stars.
Yeah, those are harsh seas too, right?
Yes,
That's
they are.
not an easy journey. You go down around the Cape of Good Hope, there are some serious storms that blow through there. And so, to your point, that's absolutely 100% correct. We do know that they were far more adept at navigating than what modern man wants to give them credit for.
Yeah, no, and I think we have so many times where we've looked and we've kind of tried to dismiss a lot of these records, a lot of this evidence, because and when I say we, I don't mean myself, I don't mean you necessarily.
Right.
I mean there's a lot of people in academia who would have who, you know, it's contrary to their idea of how cultures evolved in the Americas, how people came to the Americas to suggest anything other than a Bering Land Strait crossing. And people crossing over that ice bridge is the only idea that they can fathom, really. Um, the I think it's really interesting, even the genetic evidence that has come out. And I'm sure you've heard and or seen there's the Algonquin people in
Mhm.
the northeastern. It's in North America, right around the Great Lakes region. These are the natives that live around that region, and they do have a haplogroup, and a haplogroup is passed down from father to son. These haplogroups are this very similar to haplogroups we would find in the Near East.
That's
So
haplogroup X, right?
yes, I believe it is. At the same time, a lot of people don't know this because the evidence is actually very recent, within the last 10 years. Um, the they've found interesting haplogroups also in South America. There's these Paracas mummies with the elongated skull, you know, the Indiana Jones kind of skulls, a crystal skull. Look at this. Lots of people say, "Oh, maybe aliens." Well, they're not aliens. They're probably human as far as we know. They genetically test out to be human because we found physical evidence of that.
And look,
Some of the
when
genetic.
you're
Go ahead.
when you're young, there's all sorts of way of manipulating how a child's skull grows, right?
Yes.
Um,
No, no, they're soft. They're
yep,
soft. That's how this is something. This happened with the Huns. We have burials of Huns in Bavaria because the Huns were an Asiatic people. They came westward into Europe and they got as far west as Bavaria, and we have evidence of the same Hunnic head binding practices that made the skulls elongated. That does not mean the Huns were aliens, unfortunately. Although as it'd be cool, it'd be interesting, would definitely, you know, throw things up a little bit. That's not the reality. But these Paracas skulls down in South America, these mummies, their genetics, and they've been tested and confirmed by universities. The Some of them point to the same kind of genetics that you find in the rest of America, same as the Algonquins, right? Where lots of their genetics still point to, oh, just genetics you find anywhere from natives in the America. But some of their genetics actually come from are most prevalent in the region kind of north of the Caspian Sea in the old
mhm,
world. And so you have a weird connection right there where you have, okay, how did those people get there? Or how do we have a similar DNA, you know, with any proximity to the old world where we have these haplogroups coming in from really near the Near East, Central Asia kind of region? How did that get over to America? The reality is we don't really have a lot of answers outside of, okay, we have either the hyperdiffusionist claims or the Book of Mormon, or a combination of the two.
For those who aren't aware, talk about diffusion for a second, because that's an important key here to a lot of this.
So hyperdiffusionism is it's really hyper. Hyper just means a lot.
Yeah,
Diffusion, to diffuse something, to spread it out.
spurs.
When you're diffusing something, when you're diffusing a culture, when you're diffusing a people, that's to spread out the people. Hyperdiffusionism is the whole idea that there's a source for really civilization. Civilization originated at one real major point, and spread. It spread rapidly, whether that's from the migration of people through trade or a combination of the two, which it probably most definitely is. That's kind of the idea. I think hyperdiffusionism works quite well with the idea of Noah. If we accept a biblical flood, Noah landing his ark, well, of course, hyperdiffusionism must be correct because there's only Noah, his sons, and his wife. You don't have much,
Sure.
and his sons' wives. You don't have much other place, but that origin point for all cultures, all people to spring from. With that being said, if it all comes from one origin point, it's pretty easy to point out, okay, well, that makes sense why this Greek god looks a lot like this Roman god, for instance, or why there's this symbol in America, for instance. And I'm going to bring out this symbol because it's a very common symbol anciently, but the swastika is actually found among the native peoples of America.
Mhm.
Now, they had nothing to do with the National Socialists of Germany in the 30s and 40s. Far from it. The uh, the same symbol is found in the
Tibet.
Middle East. It's found in Tibet. It's found in China. It's found in India. It's found in Egypt. It's found even in Israel. You can find places where the swastika is literally right next to the Star of David.
Mhm.
This whole how did those symbols get there? Man, some people say, okay, well, maybe it's just a really easy symbol to draw. Well, the swastika is not that complicated of a symbol necessarily. But another point you can point to is, oh, this is a symbol that also spread with people, where people took this symbol and they repeated it over and over again. They repeated these patterns, civilizational patterns. You have pyramids in Egypt. You have pyramids in Central America.
Uh,
Why do you have pyramids in both places? Well, both people knew how to make pyramids. They figured it out at one point. Um, but yeah, so that's what hyperdiffusionism is. And but this idea that what the Book of Mormon really is proposing is essentially hyperdiffusionism, where it's a people coming from a source culture and spreading it really far away. It happens two times in the Book of Mormon with the Jaredites first, and then later on, it happens with the Nephites and the Mulekites too. I'll add them on in there. But they're kind of the same wave as the Nephites, a very similar wave, not very disconnected as far as time goes. But we have these different migrations of people and at different places from where do people the Americas?
and can I just say something about the whole elongated skull thing down in, like, Peru and Chile and that area down there?
Yeah, sure.
It's interesting to me that if you look at some Egyptian hieroglyphics, they were doing the same thing there, right?
Oh, yeah.
And then you get into pyramid building and that sort of thing. I can't help but wonder if what's going on is because of the interactions with the Nephites, and maybe some of them were Nephites, uh, they're not trying to replicate what they knew from the past, right? If there's some cultural echo that's going
Of
on.
course.
And that, because those skulls, if I'm not mistaken, were usually both I'd have to go back and check, but I'm almost certain that both in Egypt as well as down there in uh, those Central American temples, they both were associated with royalty. And when you start looking at it that way, you can't help but wonder, okay, is there some cultural echoes here, right? Do things get corrupted down south, so to speak, in the Americas, where maybe they have an oral tradition that was taught to them by some of the Nephites up north, and they're trying to replicate this, right? Trying to replicate a golden age, so to speak. But there's too many overlaps. There's another really interesting one that you can find all over. You can find this both in Mesopotamia as well as Central America, of men who come to populations carrying a bag. And in both legends, inside the bag are the tools of civilization. Which, if it's got some interesting parallels when you think about Christ's ministry or you think about any of the prophets' ministries. Largely, they were concerned with getting society civilized again. They did that through the gospel, right? That seems to be a big thing in the Book of Mormon, where when they're talking about the Lamanites, they kind of devolve to a certain aspect, right? They
Yeah, it's clear they become more tribal. The
they
civilization is
yes,
associated with the Nephites, the backwards, oh, they're not wearing much at all. They're painting themselves. They live in the wild, and
right,
there's a lot of them, but they don't have much organization besides, oh, they have a king, and that's it.
right, right. I would, if you were to ask me, I'd postulate, well, that's either the savior or prophets coming with the tools of civilization, the gospel. And that is what helps to, keep these civilizations from completely devolving over time.
No, and I think that point you made about Egypt, I think one of the most striking, skulls is, at least as depicted, is Akhenaten, who is,
Mhm,
an interesting pharaoh. He's the only monotheistic pharaoh. He, worshipped
mhm,
the sun god Aten, which, he kinda combined all the aspects from the other Egyptian pantheon and worshipped one god instead of many. That is so unusual. That is so unusual, and right afterwards, the Egyptians try to cover it up. They literally try to cover it up by meaning they, like, literally, like, chiseled they destroyed his statues, they chiseled off every record of what happened during that period, and because they didn't like that idea. They believed in their gods. I think you can't all at the same time, it just the very fact Mormonism is going to be inexplicably not inexplicably, and very clearly tied to Egypt, and
mhm,
it's tied to Egypt in multiple ways. One,
mhm,
Joseph Smith literally had a mummy. He had multiple. I think he bought at least one mummy. He bought many papyri that came from a merchant who directly came from Egypt, and that's where he got the translations from the Book of Abraham, the Book of Moses, and that's from actually not maybe not the Book of Moses. I'm pretty sure that it's for certain the Book of Abraham. And the I think there was also a talk about another translation he was going to be working on about the Book of Joseph
yep,
that never actually came to be. But we can see very clearly, okay, these are people in the scriptures who are directly associated with Egypt. But it goes further because in the Book of Mormon, well, what are they writing with? What text, what script? It's Reformed Egyptian.
Reformed Egyptian, yep,
That's exactly it. Israel itself had such an overwhelming influence from Egypt, such an interesting influence from Egypt, too, where you had some of the records that we have. That one of the reasons why we know certain biblical figures are actually historical is
mhm,
because we see their names written on little scarab beetles. The scarab
mhm,
beetle, this tradition comes from Egypt. The scarab beetles, they found, oh, it has this so and so's, this king so and so. We can tell it's his seal. It's a seal. So it'd be what you stamp it with. Say this comes from this king. It'd be a messenger that has the seal to prove that, oh yeah, I come with royal authority. And they're on these little scarab beetles. And these scarab beetles, oh, they come from Egypt, of course. That's where they come from. They're sometimes very decorated, but they're these royal seals. And this is how we know about some of these people. It's no question, it's no confusion that Egypt, with its proximity to Israel, um, had an effect not only on the people culturally, but also even like linguistically. And you can understand, well, you have you have a hieroglyphs from Egypt, but you also have hieratic, and later on when the Greeks conquer Egypt, you have Coptic.
Mhm.
Uh, and you have these texts, and I think uh, I think comparing and understanding the Book of Mormon as something which is to a degree has an influence from Egypt is no doubt because Lehi and his family were influenced from Egypt. Egypt was kind of like their neighbor, was their enemy, sometimes their overlord, and occasionally a friend
Mhm.
in trade anyways. But yeah, so we have all these different things, all these connections you can find between the old world and the new world. And when we get into the text, and I kind of want to turn things back towards some of the text
Er
and some of the ideas and some of the speculation and some of even the cultural, because these people in America, they speak directly about even Jesus Christ. Now you can find people speaking of Jesus Christ from North to South America if you find it, if you look for it. Um, and I want to talk just a bit about that because now there is a there is a god in South America, a god in Peru, and his name is Viracocha, I believe. It's
Viracocha. Yep.
Viracocha.
Yep. Viracocha.
Viracocha, and Viracocha, it's weird. It's really weird, this god Viracocha,
Mhm.
because when the Spanish come, for some reason, the natives start calling the Spanish, they associate them directly with Viracocha. The
Huh?
Andean people, they call the Spaniards, oh, Viracocha. And they associate Viracocha, their god, with the Spanish. Viracocha, according to legend, he was associated with the sea. He's associated with this whole idea of coming and teaching and uplifting a civilization,
Mhm.
bringing them out of a kind of a slump and teaching them all kinds of things that they didn't know before, associated with, I believe, agriculture, associated with certain kinds of plants, and bringing civilization, essentially, a civilizing force. You mentioned and connected it, that civilizing force directly to the gospel. Viracocha is one of these examples. He comes from South America, the Andes region specifically, but he this is typical of Christ. The other kind of idea, the other one connected to this is Quetzalcoatl,
The
the
feathered
one that
serpent.
John the one John Taylor connects it to, the serpent, right? And Jesus is called a serpent. Jesus is the serpent which opposes the devil, who is also represented by a serpent. They're both two serpents, one good, one evil. And that's the serpent's the one that's on the cross.
Mhm. The
That's
one that
that's what
that
Moses.
is taken today, if I'm not mistaken, for the double serpent around a
Yeah,
staff.
exactly.
I think
Yeah.
that's a direct reference to that.
That's the red cross. That's directly associated. When you see that symbol, it's associated with health, with healing, because that's what Jesus did. That's what it's associated with. And when we find this idea of these connection, this serpent, this plumed serpent kind of cult, this idea is spread kind of throughout America. In fact, there is some speculation that even the name America comes from one of the names of this kind of plumed serpent god. Um, but that's speculation nonetheless, and it comes from a little strained etymology. Nevertheless, it's interesting. But I I do want to mention and talk because I think it's interesting. It's a very important part, I think, because this distinction, the Book of Mormon, and it's a distinction which I think is unfortunately some have tried to get remove it over time. But there's a distinction between the Lamanites and the Nephites. That the Nephites had a white skin and the Lamanites had a dark skin. This is a clear distinction. Is that the question is, okay, do we find this
Mhm.
distinction in America? Well, if you want to look for it, yes, it does. It's everywhere. We have evidence. Now, even now, I believe it's the island with the giant face statues. What island is that?
Oh,
Uh,
where the Moai are.
Oh,
Easter
yeah, the
Island.
Moai. Easter Island, of
Easter
course.
Island.
Easter
Yep.
Island. My bad. I'm trying but Easter Island, it's quite far off the coast of South America.
Mhm.
Legends, like I just want to start with this legend because it's interesting. The legend is that there was a white people, literally a people with light or lighter skin that up that these that were on this island. A people with darker skin came over and they essentially pushed them to extinction and they killed them all.
Hmm.
That was it. That was their story. Their story was literally, yeah, we killed them all. Um, moving on. There is in South America, I'm gonna work my way up northwards as far as I have recollection. In South America, there when the Spanish came, they talked about a people that they saw. They saw or they learned about a people that are referred to as the cloud people. Cloud people were interesting. I believe they were generally bearded, which isn't super
Mm.
common among Native Americans. It's
Mm.
not really that common at all. But they also seem to be they compared them to white people. They compared them to themselves. That they are that they were considered the most beautiful of the people in the Andes, and that the Sapa Inca, the emperor essentially of what we call the Inca Empire, Tiwanaku, the Sapa Inca, they usually sought out wives from these people because they were considered the most beautiful. And when we go to the Spanish account of one of the Inca emperor that they captured, they tried to ransom him for a whole room of gold and another room full of silver. And well, of course, they killed him. But either way, they compared his skin, and they said his skin was lighter than the other people around him. There was most of the empire was generally darker skinned, but he was lighter skinned. Now we can probably make a guess that it could be because the royalty would intermix with these cloud people, what they could call the cloud people. Now that these people don't necessarily exist today, they have been intermixed and intermarried with all kinds of different people, and they don't exist as necessarily a strong culture, as far as I know. But we go just a little bit further north, north from Chile and Peru, and go into kind of Ecuadorish area. The Quiche. The Quiche have well, actually, it's this is I was wrong. I thought the Quiche were. I was thinking of a different group of people who did live in Ecuador. This is actually closer to Guatemala. But the Quiche of Guatemala, their legend. Now this is actually quoted in General Conference once. This is 1995 when it was quoted in General Conference. It was quoted by Teddy Brewerton. It says right here, and he says, for example, a translator of the title of the lords of Totono Potonicapan, the original text of which was recorded in 1554 in the language of the Quiche of Guatemala. From legends centuries old states, the three great Quiche nations are descendants of the 10 tribes of the kingdom of Israel, whom Shalmaneser reduced to perpetual captivity and who, finding themselves on the border of Assyria, resolved to emigrate. These then What are the three nations of Quiches? And they came from where the sun rises, descendants of Israel, of the same language and same customs. They were sons of Abraham and Jacob. In Guatemala, we have a very clear. Now, this is a translator. This is the translator's notes of a record, and the translator himself, I believe, is actually a native, if I'm not mistaken. And but he's associating it with the tribes of Israel. He's saying, and this is 1500s. This is shortly at this. To give you an idea, Cortez arrives in the 1500s. Cortez comes to
Mhm.
Mexico in the 1500s. Columbus,
Mhm.
1492. Cortez, 1500s. Then they get to Central America, right? And so this is very, very early on that we get this. And now we have even further northwards. Now, I do want to note there is I don't know how much you know about the. Oh, there's one more thing about those people. I believe this is I can't pronounce this name very well, but it's Titulo di Totno Toto Nikapan. This is related
Teotihuacan.
to Teokan. I can I could paste the name to you right now so you can see what it is.
Okay,
But
alright.
it's title of Totonacapan, and it's this document directly refers to 7 caves, 7 canyons in the other part of the ocean where the sun sets. They were descent. This is the document that he's translating from. This is the document it comes from. But it mentions 7 caves, 7 canyons, 7 caves, 7 canyons. I just want you to remember that because that's an important thing. That's the document we were just talking about. Um, because we're going to move a little bit further north to the Aztecs. And the Aztecs are very, very interesting. The Aztecs, also known as the Mexica,
Mhm.
Aztec, the word Aztec itself comes from this word called Aztlan. Now, Aztlan described as this kind of like this paradise sort of place. In
Yes.
fact, translation of Aztlan is place of whiteness. Literally,
Mm.
Aztalan is translated as place of whiteness. So it's a place of whiteness. The idea is Aztalan is potentially, at least in according to them, is in the north somewhere, and is this island within a body of water. And but Aztalan also mentions 7. The right in there's 7 tribal groups that came from Aztalan. Or not Aztalan, but Chico Molstok, which is the place of 7 caves. It produced 7 tribal groups. I'm not going to pronounce all their names, but one of them is the Mexica, who are the Aztecs. And I bring up this number 7 a lot, but if you look at the Book of Mormon, there are 7 groups of people, 7 groups that come on Lehi's journey, 7 groups of people. You have you have generally what the Nephites, the Lamanites, the Ishmaelites. Um, let me the okay Nephites, Jacobites, Josephites, Zoramites, Lamanites, Lamuelites, and Ishmaelites. I wrote it down so I don't forget. But those are 7. Those are the 7 that came from there, and
Mhm.
we have a legend about a homeland which is surrounded by a body of water and then we have another kind of idea. Okay, there's this place where there's 7 caves, 7 different tribes came from it. It seems now, obviously, a lot of these stories are passed down orally, so they're bound to get mixed up. They're bound to get confused.
Mhm.
They weren't written down for a long, long time, especially since the destruction of the Nephites, which is also essentially the destruction of a written language for quite a wide period of time, at least for a lot of people in the Americas. Now, this idea that there's 7 people, they come. They come from one place. This is very reminiscent of one people from Lehi's family that became seven in America. And it's connected directly to this Aztec legend. And I want to go even further with the Aztecs because now, of course, Montezuma is quite interesting, quite an interesting figure. I think it's very misunderstood. A lot of people have pushed back on this idea that was seen as Quetzalcoatl, as the embodiment of Quetzalcoatl. But I think that there's a lot of confusion and a lot of pushback on some of the early theories that maybe the Spanish were trying to justify their conquest of Mexico through some of these ideas that they're kind of spinning as they're conquering it. But I think Montezuma is really interesting in how he treats Cortez.
Mm.
Now, he doesn't at first, his scouts actually attack the Spanish. So at first, the first contact is actually violent until Cortez comes. And there's actually more detailed reports. It's a larger group of people that come with Cortez. Cortez is definitely prepared for military combat. And he literally like has the ships destroyed. Cortez destroys the ships. The whole reason why Cortez is able to conquer Mexico is because he literally has a loophole in the Spanish law where he makes a whole city, he has them elect him mayor, and a mayor can redirect an army's orders, and then he redirects himself, who is the leader of the army also, to go attack and then he
Mhm.
goes and does his whole thing. But as Cortez is marching towards Mexico City, Montezuma keeps sending him gifts. And it's so unusual. He sends him gifts of gold, feathers, even I think people potentially, servants, right? And all these things that he's giving to them over and over again. And he's saying, "Well, it's wonderful you want to come to our city, but please go away. We have a plague," or they made some kind of excuse. There's a plague, or it's not a good time, or where it's kind of not, you just shouldn't come. And they keep on saying this. And it's really weird because the Mexica, these Aztecs, they are so powerful. This is the superpower of the region.
Yep.
There's more people in Mexico City than any city in Europe at this time. It's the biggest city potentially on earth, maybe even rivaling some of the cities in India and China, which would probably be the only comparable cities. And they keep on doing the same thing. Montezuma keeps on sending these people, and it seems to me like he's trying to delay. Well, what's he trying to delay? It seems like he's trying to prevent them from coming. Now, this is my speculation. This is purely my speculation. This is theory. This is only basis, and this is how I'm looking at the narrative and how I'm seeing it line up. I think Montezuma knew something. He literally the Aztecs had like a royal archive. They could
Mhm.
write, and they did have things that they taught and learned. But I think eventually somehow is passed down, maybe garbled a little bit so they couldn't understand it perfectly. But they knew something about the return of someone, the return of something, and they probably also remembered that they killed all those Nephites. They probably had this idea, and they probably were, and this is where it actually adds up to a really weird point because the Spanish actually finally do get there. And weirdly enough, it's Montezuma who says, "Oh, yes, our people are brothers, but we were just separated." It's Montezuma who's saying that, "Oh, our people are brothers." Montezuma's first encounter with white people, he's probably thinking the Nephites are coming back. He
Well,
might be thinking the Nephites are coming back, and it's probably garbled in with this idea of Christ returning too. And it might be a weird thing. It might be like a superstitious fear, but either way, he's worried. He's worried for one reason or another because his culture remembers some kind of prophecy or revelation or direction. And I think there even is one in the Book of Mormon that that the uh, the Gentiles would end up decimating the Lamanites. But nevertheless, I would you'd have to double check that for me, or someone would have to double check that. But they're coming there, and Montezuma meets them, and he basically calls them brothers. Oh yeah, we're brothers, just distant brothers. And he's worried about a prophecy being fulfilled, I believe, and then they kind of fulfill it.
Yeah. You
And
know, I could just imagine. I'm sorry, I'm kinda giggling because I can just imagine Montezuma trying to explain because he thinks that it's either God or the Nephites coming back like, "Yeah, I don't know where the other Nephites are. They, like, wandered off I'm sure they're here somewhere." No knowing full well what's going on. I do wanna speak to something real quick on
sure,
Aslan.
go ahead.
So, interestingly enough, that's not just associated with the Aztecs, that's actually associated as well with the Mississippian culture. And it translates the same, either to the place of the heron
Yeah,
or
I've heard the
place of
place of the heron
whiteness.
too.
Yep. And so it is interesting that and it does say place of whiteness as well, right? It's kind of interchangeable, it sounds like. But
Well, yeah, well, the heron
nonetheless,
is a white bird is the idea, I
yep,
think.
yep. Nonetheless, it does seem to show that there is continuity, at least from Central America up to North America, as far north as Wisconsin. And so
And
that
I
absolutely does
yeah.
hold water.
No, and I agree. I've heard multiple ideas of where Aztlan is. Some people would point to it maybe being within Mexico, modern Mexico today. Some people I've heard actually point, "Oh, it's the Great Salt Lake," is what some people say. I thought that was interesting. But that makes plenty of sense. This whole idea of a place with lots of water. There's a ton of water in the Mississippi. I don't know if you've seen it, but I've seen it. It's pretty huge.
I'm
That's a
not
lot of
that far
water.
from the Mississippi. It's a big river.
So yeah, it would make sense that these connections, well, they're associating with the North and associating with water and an island.
And
That's
again,
all I know.
they're trading, precious metals. They're most likely trading ideas as well.
Oh yeah. And even to add on to that, something you might not have known. Uh, in Florida, actually, the
Mhm.
now Florida is a really interesting place. Lots of interesting stuff there, but there are weird and strange. There's Mayan ruins
Yep.
in Florida. There's literally a direct connection. We have the same kinds of pottery, I believe, even that found in the Maya culture, also found in Florida. They were able to sail back and forth between Florida and the Yucatan.
Yep.
Um, so that's another interesting connection too. These people were moving around. They were trading. They were certainly trading. And you mentioned that Michigan copper. Of course, it's all throughout America. Of course, it is. It's the best deposit of copper in America that they had easy access to. You go there, you can pick it up off the ground. It's that easy to get.
Mhm.
It's not hard. They didn't even need to heat it up that much. They didn't need to melt it because it was so pure. It was so pure. They just hit it with a rock after they heated it up in a fire. Not they didn't even have, like, a fancy furnace or anything. But, there was definitely trade and definitely connections all throughout there. I, uh, I would even, I would even say that the trade and connections warrants that, "Oh, yeah, these people knew a lot more than they let on." It's really unfortunate that the Aztec archives are basically destroyed.
That
Then
and
the
the
Spanish came
Library of
through.
Alexandria, both, yeah.
Yeah, the Library of Alexandria was. Now, I won't put this lightly, the Library of Alexandria was basically destroyed by the church after it had
Mhm.
started to go astray. You find the church going after almost a century, about a century after the church starts to go astray, Library of Alexandria. Oh, let's go in there, let's burn it, let's destroy it. Some of the books were preserved somehow by some miracle by the Persians of all people, interestingly enough, and eventually translated by the Arabs, eventually brought to Europe somehow. And it's wonderful we still have what we do have, but the loss of knowledge and information there, the loss of knowledge and information from this destruction of the Aztecs. There's so much we don't know,
Absolutely.
and it's sad. It's sad, but this is what we have to work with.
Yep.
And I I would go even further north though with I've been going. I'm just into Mexico now, but now I think there are some peoples. I think even further north. I want to go into the there's some peoples in Nevada, natives in Nevada, Utah area, and there's actually a cave in Nevada, I believe. Now, this is easy to prove, it's easy to show online if you just do a quick Google. But there's a cave where the natives say they drove white, red-haired giants, is what they called them,
Mhm.
into the cave, and then they essentially killed them all.
If I'm
Oh yeah,
not
that's the cave.
mistaken if I'm not mistaken, they actually have recovered, like, a huge pair of sandals out of there, or more than 1 pair.
Oh
Like,
really?
you let me hold on. Yeah, keep talking here. I'm gonna do a quick Google search, and I'll share my
Yeah,
screen.
no, no, go ahead, go ahead. I just know even like the woman who is one of the women who's telling the stories, like, yeah, well, it's you see the red in my hair? It's because yeah, my great grandfather or something, he found himself a wife from one of them, and something like that happened. But there is
Right.
evidence, I think, and even connecting. I know there's Brewer's Cave. That's in Utah. That's another connection that's even further to make, and usually connected to Jaredites, those. But as far as I know, these there is clear evidence. I think there's even an island off the coast of California where a similar legend is repeated of a group of white people. Usually they're described as taller or giant that are killed off by the other group of people and
Yep.
driven to extinction. And we
Are
find these burial mounds with giants
on my
too.
screen
Go
real
on.
quick? Alright, let me share this real quick
Go
here.
ahead.
This is interesting. Okay, so, it's called Lovelock Cave. The giant sandals linked to Lovelock Cave came from the early 20th century excavations of the site near Lovelock, Nevada, and began in 1911 when miners dug for bat guano. The University of California conducted formal digs in 1912 and 24, recovering thousands of artifacts, including 15-inch long sandals made or woven of material. We do have an image, by the way. This is that sandal right there.
Wow.
And that is 15 feet, I mean, 15 inches long. So whoever they were big folks. Now, if I'm not mistaken, the legend around Lovelock Canyon also states that um, the reason the natives killed them all was because they were cannibalistic. Now,
Yes. Well,
my
go ahead.
contention there is that's we need to certainly take that under advisement. I'm not a fan of just simply ignoring what native populations have to say, right? However, I don't think you can discount propaganda being a thing either, right? If you, one of the major contentions or points of emphasis, if you look at like the documentary hypothesis, is that you essentially had the northern and southern kingdoms who were kind of fighting for the narrative a little bit, right?
Yeah.
And certainly, if if these giants were actually righteous, you gotta have a good reason to tell your kids that you got rid of them, right? You can't just go with, "Well, we didn't like their religion," or "We didn't like them," or something like that. You
We didn't like the when they looked at me funny. Or, yeah, you can't just say that. You need a casus belli, or
Yeah,
casus belli,
yeah.
which is the
Not
reason
s
for war, cause for war.
Right, and I'm not saying that's what happened, but I am finding it interesting, right? Red-headed, they call them giants, but really 15-inch feet, you're probably looking at 7 feet tall,
Yeah.
most likely, right? So, not giants in terms of hundreds of feet large or 50 feet large, just bigger than most native population.
Bigger than you or me, essentially,
Yep,
by at least a foot, if not more.
yep, yep,
But, no, I certainly, would add to that because now the Book of Mormon actually describes both the Lamanites and the Nephites as being cannibalistic near the end, where
yep,
both the Lamanites and the Nephites were literally just eating each other. And it was horrific. And the Nephites were kind of doing it in revenge, and then the Lamanites were continuing to do it because yeah, you doing it more than I'm going to do it more. It's like hey, it's like a competition to see how evil you could be. Not really the best competition. Doesn't end anywhere good if you know the end of the Book of Mormon. But yeah, it seems very similar. Oh yeah, and that would be an easy way to justify the war after the fact. They might have been eating people too, but hey, yeah, those giants, they were eating people, and we decided to kill them all.
yep,
There you go. That's the reason why. And it's pretty. It makes it pretty simple and pretty easy. But this is not the only cave. This is not the only mound where we've found remnants of people, and it's just there's hundreds. And this is why I kind of stick to a hemispheric model, or more or less a hemispheric model, where the landing starts in South America and moves northward from there, because there's just from that point forward, there's so much happening from here all the way to there. I believe, the one Kimura theory. One Kimura. I stick with one Kimura. Of course, maybe some people might say it takes some mental gymnastics to sit there. I don't think it does. But either way, the hill Kimura is literally a hill.
mhm,
There's other hills that are supposed to be hills. These hills, now, there are many cultures that bury people in hills, that build mounds. You find these, of course, you find them associated. You find barrows in England. You find kurgans in Ukraine, in the steppe. You find mounds. These mounds, people would build mounds, put their dead in, to put things in, to even be sacred religious places. If you worshipped or had connections even to the ancestors, sometimes they would be centers for that too. And there are so many mounds which have been destroyed, unfortunately, as America moved westward.
yep,
Just so many wiped off. And you can find newspaper after newspaper
yep,
that says, "Oh yeah, we found a bunch of giant bones here. The femur bone was this big, which means the giant might have been this big if we knew how big, if we knew had the rest of his body, but we just had his femur bone, or we found this and that, or we found." And you find again and again and again, and we find also, of course, some of this is going to be open to fraud, but there are instances where we have inscriptions which appear similar to Hebrew, to Phoenician,
yep,
to hieroglyphics, other kind of writing systems, all across what is essentially the continental United States.
yep,
And unfortunately, I believe there have been academics and institutions that have tried to, you know, push that evidence aside, cover it up, destroy it even, unfortunately. Um, I as they were coming out west, a lot of it just got bulldozed and replaced with farmland.
yep,
Not that I'm blaming the farmer for wanting to feed his family and sell his crop, just that a lot of the time we didn't recognize, oh, You're digging into Zelf's mound, and now Zelf's mound is we're just realizing, oh, Zelf's is just one of like tens of thousands.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, exactly, right? And I tend to judge those guys with a lot of charity because they didn't know, right? It's not like today when you discover something, we all are a little bit more educated now than what we used to be, right? So
Yep.
we can look at and go, okay, this has probably got some significance. We should call out the archaeologists. However, I wanna say this, many arrowhead have I kind of just pocketed on certain job sites because there have been a plethora of things shut down over arrowheads and nothing's ever found, and you gotta ask the question, "Did it fall out? Was that native just a bad shot that day?" Um, any number of
Yeah.
things, right? And so and again, I'm sure it was really interesting to him at first, but like everything else, you get used to stuff, right? You get used
Yeah.
to finding things, and pretty
Oh,
soon
another mound. What do you think is going to be in this one?
yeah,
And then they dig it up.
just
And okay,
yeah, just
just a
doze
bunch of
it,
bones.
right?
Looks like.
Yep, exactly. Just doze it, doesn't matter, we gotta plant that crop, right? So, absolutely, it's yeah, I mean, I judge them pretty softly, but, it is what it is. They got dozed and it's unfortunate. I look at that kinda like I look at the Library of Alexandria, right? Sure be nice to have those records now,
Oh yeah,
but nonetheless, we are where we are.
yeah. And that's kind of that's kind of what, unfortunately, but also fortunately, because it's a little bit fun sometimes to speculate and kind of try to
Yep,
understand and sift through the past. We have this big mystery that is kind of before us, and we only have so much record. And from that record, you can only really, oftentimes, the limit is your imagination, really.
yes,
I know it's maybe some people might shy away from that idea that, oh, well, we have to stick to the general pattern. Well, let me remind any people who think that for some people actually didn't think that Nineveh was a real city. Some
right.
people didn't think Nineveh was actually a place. Oh, it's just this biblical thing that they made up. And some people used it to kind of, early on 1900, early 1900s, they were kind of like, oh yeah, Nineveh's like just another example of why the Bible's inaccurate here or there. Well, come here comes the inspiration for Indiana Jones. Last name was actually Woolley, believe it or not, Leonard Woolley. And he stumbles across the library of Ashurbanipal, the city of Nineveh, and now not only do we have the where we know where Nineveh is now, we also have the Epic of Gilgamesh because of that. And the Epic of Gilgamesh, yet another example of a
Global
great flood
flood.
narrative. A
Yep,
global flood narrative, even hey, Gilgamesh, even in the story, what does he do? He goes to the one guy who survives the flood, and what does he talk to him about? He asks him, well, how can I get eternal life?
yeah,
Interesting. Interesting that of all the things that Gilgamesh wants, he wants eternal life, and he asks the guy who survived the flood, which I speculate is either, I think the two obvious answers, I think, are Shem or Noah.
right,
And
right.
I think, of course, Gilgamesh fails at least in the narrative, but nevertheless, it's super interesting.
But again, we should expect to find differences because, again, it's all oral tradition. It's all handed down around a campfire, and at some point, it gets corrupted. It's just how it
Yeah.
works. Entropy works on us physically and, mentally as well.
No, and the traditions of that are passed down and down and down. Most times we don't have oral traditions. There are some cultures who actually preserve oral traditions very, very accurately. It's not super common, but we have people who are literally like, oh, well, they memorize and they have to say it exactly the same way, and they sing the same. They do it usually with a song, or they sing it like a song, and they're telling a story. Not all oral traditions are like that. Most oral traditions are more like, oh, yeah, grandpa told me about that once. He told me about this and that. Oh, okay, that's interesting. And then they remember that, and then they tell that vague detail and they continue it on. And sometimes you get some storyteller. Now, this storyteller will like say, like, oh yeah, my grandpa great 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 grandpa did do that, huh? Oh well, yeah, I think great 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 grandpa was also a god. I think his name was he was the god Odin, and he was
Right.
one-eyed, and he had this raven on his shoulder. And you see, that's kind of I think that's kind of what's happened with some of these myths and legends, where Odin is actually listed as an ancestor for many English kings,
Yep.
but he's at the same time a god. Well, how can you have both? Well, the idea is he probably started as a man, and then someone made him
Yep.
god.
Yep. Yep. No, all these things are echoes, right? Um, and it's interesting that they get glossed over so much because they don't fit the established narrative. You were talking just about cities that were thought to be fictitious, but then discovered real. Troy was the same way. Troy wasn't rediscovered until 1871. Up until that time, everyone thought that Troy was just an invention.
Yeah, just Homer's just writing a story about a battle, and
Yep, yep,
it
and then
didn't
all of a
end up
sudden, lo and
happening.
behold, they discover it, right? And so as time goes along, a lot of these things are starting to become more and more validated. I think a good point as far as the restored gospel goes is the book of Enoch and the Enoch chapters out of Moses. I mean, they hit really closely to the Ethiopian. I believe it's the Ethiopian book of
Well, yeah, that the Ethiopians are the ones who did preserve, I think, the fullest version of the Book of
Yep,
Enoch that we know of.
yep,
I think Gertz or Getz is the language, something like that.
yep.
It's the they wrote it.
But
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 yeah,
again,
no,
Joseph's hitting some bullseyes, right? And as time goes along, he continues to be proven right over and over again. And likewise, man in his wisdom, um, is continued show folly, right? Every time we stand up and say, "Well, we figured it out." And look, in my opinion, archaeology is the worst ones. I'm not throwing all archaeologists under the bus. I think
sure,
there's a lot of great archaeologists out there. I know a couple. But the truth is that even the ones that are good are trying to play the game of getting published, right? And
of course.
that's
You
how
need
you
because you
get your
need money to live.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
the
that's how
thing.
they get yeah, exactly. And so they're fighting an uphill battle, even the good ones. But realistically, archaeology's been a discipline for just about 100 years. And so like in 75 of those 100 years, they at some point stand up and say we figured out human origins.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, that's kind of arrogant. Right? like you're going to proclaim the breadth of human history just re-put back together in 75 years. That's pretty arrogant. Um, and so I do think that there's just so much more of the story, and I think the Book of Mormon is definitely one of those stories that I think we can hang our hats on. I think there's enough evidence there alone to call it valid.
No, for sure. I think, and I think I don't know if you've seen there's a chart. There was a chart that was made about it was all the 100% proven factors of the evidence that Joseph Smith could have known about that was already discovered in America, like evidence of this, evidence of that. And over time, that chart has gone filled up. All these historical claims that Joseph Smith is making that we used to thought, oh no, no way. No, okay. We actually did dig up this, and this is actually because like before we didn't actually know if there was like metallic armor. I think we've dug up that metallic armor since then.
Mhm.
Or we didn't know there was this or that. We didn't know people could create like specific kind of gold works. Well, it turns out many cultures in America, I think one of the most famous one I think is probably the cultures in the Andes and Central America for gold work specifically. but they've produced excellent, amazing gold works, many of which unfortunately melted down by the Spanish. I mean, for a good cause, for flooding the European markets full of gold and paying for their armies to put down the Dutch revolt. Didn't end up working to actually lost the Netherlands. That's why the Netherlands exists today. But the whole point that I'm getting across here is we have a lot of evidence. We have so much evidence. Now, people might get hung up over certain points of geography. That's why I haven't stuck to any like really big guns saying, "Oh, this is exactly where this is, and that's undisputed." Period. Because honestly, I don't necessarily need to accept that they landed in Chile or even South America to say that I believe in the Book of Mormon. I'm just saying that a right now, current evidence seems to point to that. Chile seems like an all right landing spot. At least it would have been a nice place for them to land, pretty peaceful. But that's not the end all. That is not
Right.
the end all. There's always going to be something more. And at the end of the day, the whole point of any kind of honest science is when you're wrong
You
to
admit you're wrong.
adjust, to
Yeah.
admit you're wrong and adjust. You adjust your views. It's like, oh, you're backpedaling now. Oh yeah, I'm back. If I backpedal, it's because, oh yeah, I made a mistake. I don't want to go that way. I biked down that road thinking I was going down the right road. Nope, that was the wrong road. That led to a cliff. I'm going this way instead.
That
So,
you are 100% correct. It's something I caution people on all the time. There are things that we know at our core, right, that are true. The Book of Mormon is true. Joseph Smith was a prophet. Whatever those are that you know. Everything else is an idea, right? And it's okay to have ideas. You should have ideas.
of
That's part
course,
of the fun of Mormonism, right? My contention is this: call it for what it is, though, because if you develop a theory that you're so married to that you can't really prove, and evidence comes along later that contradict your original hypothesis, you want to be able to drop that idea like that fast, just be done with it. And that doesn't make you a waffler. That doesn't mean you're backpedaling. What that means is that you're a reasonable, logical human being who's discovered more evidence and you're going with the evidence. That is good. And so don't get married to an idea. Don't make an idea part of you. Get your testimony from God and run with that.
no, yeah, for sure. And at the same time, I think Joseph Smith said something along the lines of, "I never heard of a man being damned for believing too much, but they are
Right?
damned for unbelief." It's better you believe, even if you're called a little bit crazy. It's better you have a few crazy but wrong ideas, but a few crazy but right ideas and reject none of them. Than
Exactly.
reject all of the crazy ideas you got and suddenly damn yourself from potentially opening up to more.
And look, some
Because
of those
yeah.
there's been a ton of guys who got called crazy early on that were found out to be right later. The guy who first talked about germs, right? There was a great Netflix series on, I can't remember which president it was, one that was assassinated after the Civil War. Can't
Mm,
remember his name. Oh, it's gonna I think it was Garfield.
McKinley?
Was
McGarfield?
Garfield assassinated?
Uh, yeah, I think he was. James A. Garfield was assassinated.
Okay, I think it was Garfield. There were 2 doctors in that movie after he was shot, and one doctor was a believer in this germ theory that had been introduced. The other doctor did not. And the one doctor keeps warning, "Wash your hands, wash your hands, wash your instruments, right? Stay clean." And this doctor goes, "Germs is a crazy idea. Holds no water." What do we find later? So, yeah, just because you believe some things that maybe are unorthodox to society doesn't mean they're wrong. It just means
True.
maybe you're early, right? But again, don't be cautious. Be careful. If don't espouse too much to things you can't prove. Um, and stay open.
Yeah, no, and that's for sure. I think, I think a good point for this is kind of even just to look to the Savior. Because how
Mhm.
is he treated? How is he treated? Well, he seemed to know more than everyone else there, all the other most learned men in the region, and time again, they're coming and calling him a false prophet, a false teacher. They're calling him, they commit many different crimes against him, and they do it because they are holding on to ideas that they can't let go of.
Yep.
And Jesus Christ, you know, he it to them he seems crazy. But it took those 12 crazy guys to believe, say, "Okay, Jesus, I believe you." And some crazy women who, fell for the Savior. And I think it's, you know, to do anything, you gotta be a little bit crazy. You gotta be little bit crazy about what you're doing. You gotta be a little bit passionate. And I would rather someone be passionate and wrong than, lukewarm and kind of right.
Sure. Yep. Absolutely. Well, Freeman, is there anything that we went over that or haven't gone over that you wanted to touch on?
Honestly, I've touched over it quite a lot. There's a lot to go over with a lot of this, and there's probably many things I could have talked um, about the history of America and about where the migrations and movements of the people and where certain locations are according to early founders. I know I touched maybe briefly about the Magdalena River, um, but interesting. The Magdalena River is named after one of Jesus's wives. So
Yep.
hey,
Mary of
interesting,
Magdalene.
interesting. It would be a fun place for Zarahemla to be, but that's not necessarily where it needs to be. I'm open to that idea. I'm open to a lot of these ideas because I don't think it's settled. I don't think it's settled, but at the same time, I don't think it's I don't think we don't have a starting point either. And I know it's something that just about everyone can agree on. You
Yep.
know, Lehi and his family started in Jerusalem, and they worked their way down to Arabia, and they ended up in America.
Yep.
Now, yeah, we know that. Now, once now then people start speculating. But if you at least believe in that,
You got it made.
you're on a good firm foundation because the Book of Mormon is not supposed to be a text to tell you about the history. The history is a byproduct, and it's a
Yep.
good history. It's an interesting history, and it's fascinating to look at and trying to figure out these things. But the history is second to the gospel that's being taught there.
Absolutely.
And the gospel is the most important thing that you can learn from the Book of Mormon. And the gospel of Jesus Christ is so simple. Repentance, faith, baptism for the remission of sins. It is so simple, so pure, and so concise. Jesus wants us to follow him. This book is telling us to follow him. It's another time where Jesus is coming to people. Follow me. I'll help you. I'll lead you. I'll guide you. Now, Jesus, he didn't just come to one people, he came to many. Now, I think the last thing I'll probably say, and I'll probably list a few of the people that there's even an inkling of evidence that Jesus visited. Jesus according to the Muslims, likely visited many places in Persia. According to some people, in monasteries in the Hindu Kush region, which is in India, Pakistan region, kind of Afghanistan almost, uh, they say Jesus went there too. There are people in northern Japan that say, oh, yeah, Jesus had a wife, children, and he died and he was buried here. That's what they say. Now, obviously, there's some ideas about that. There's other traditions even about the Buryats, that Jesus visited the Buryat people, which are kind of around Mongolia today.
Mhm.
They're not Mongols. If a Buryat ever heard this, they say, no, we're not Mongols. They'd be get upset at me because the Buryats and the Mongols have fought each other for many years in the past. And of course, Jesus visited America.
Mhm.
And that is such a profound thing. This new world, this promised land, Jesus came there and he paved the way for us to reach salvation. If we lose the point of salvation of what Jesus was trying to do, why was he teaching all these people? What was he doing? Why did he even go to the prisoners, those in spiritual prison? Why did he go to them? Because he wanted to give them a chance to be saved.
Yep.
The gospel is for those who are broken, that they might be repaired again. Anyways, I could say in the name of Jesus Christ, amen, but not everything I said is necessarily, sanctioned by Christ, but those things I would say in the name
No,
of Jesus
the
Christ, amen.
yeah, absolutely. Those things were good. The stuff there at the end for sure. Well, Freeman, this was fun, bro. Again, fun topic to talk about. I tell this to everyone and I mean it. Once you guys been on here once, you got a standing invitation to come back on. You just need to reach out to me. And you studying something and you want to get it out there and flush it out, give me a call. We'll get you back on. All
Oh
right.
yeah. Hey, sure. Maybe I'm starting to study some Coptic, some old Egyptian texts. Hey, maybe if I learn something, maybe I'll
Yeah,
tell you.
you learned something, give me a call. I'd love to do something on Coptic Christianity. Think that'd be awesome. So that I believe that is the longest continually running sect of Christianity that we have to date. So it would absolutely be awesome. But all right, man. Well, thanks again. Hang out just 5 minutes, all right?
Sure.
All right. Bye everybody.